think that all goes to prove that this is live and it's not pre-recorded. Wayne sent me a message just a few moments ago to say, should we let them enjoy themselves with their dinner for a little bit longer, or had we better have your speech now? So you've had your few minutes longer, ladies and gentlemen, and it gives me enormous pleasure to deliver the 2017 oration. I am disappointed and frustrated beyond imagination that I cannot be with you in person this evening, but as you've heard from Wayne, circumstances intervened. But it is a great privilege to be giving this oration. I know I follow in some very distinguished footsteps. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging a great Australian. She is no captain of industry. She's never held elected office. She is not a great media celebrity or sports star. But for me, Helen Johnson is a great Australian hero, because for the last 24 years, she and her husband and her family have been caring for their profoundly disabled son, Ben. Now, for me, it is a great example of somebody who hasn't just accepted their fate, but who has embraced it and actually has found a purpose in life, not just in caring for her own son, but becoming an amazing ambassador for carers across Australia. She's an ambassador for Carers Australia, a great advocate. She is a vice president of Carers Victoria, that I was unfortunately unable to meet in Canberra at the Australian Parliament on Tuesday, but Helen very kindly substituted there for me. And Helen is a wonderful example of that old adage that the happiest people in life are not those who have the best of everything, but those who make the best of everything they have. Now, tonight I want to explore the interrelationship between individual purpose, like Helen's, and organisational purpose. Today is a year ago to the day since the United Kingdom voted in our European Union referendum. In my judgment, we made a profoundly wrong choice. If you are a political junkie, you may already have read a fascinating book by the political editor of the Sunday Times in the UK, Tim Shipman. It's called All Out War, and it's a brilliant analysis with unprecedented access to all of the key players about how the referendum campaign unfolded, about the mistakes and the techniques that were used by the different sides. It's exceptionally even-handed. I strongly recommend it. But if we're to really understand the Brexit vote in the UK and the Trump election victory in the States and other populist movements, then I think we need to look instead at another book which came out very recently as well. And that's by another journalist, David Goodhart, for many years with the Financial Times. And David Goodhart's book is called The Road to Somewhere. And in The Road to Somewhere, he explains the idea that in societies like the United Kingdom today, we have roughly 50% of the population who are somewheres, people who are deeply rooted in community, who have a strong attachment to history and to groups, almost kind of tribal loyalties, who tend to be less educated, and 25% roughly of our population who are the anywheres, people who could be just as happy and contented in London or in Shanghai or Singapore or Melbourne or New York or San Francisco, who are generally better educated, who are much less attached to community and to place. The reality is, according to David Goodhart in his book, that for the last 2 or 3 decades, it's been the anywheres who've dominated politics, and media and society, and they've consciously or otherwise run society for their own interests. And the David Goodhart thesis, which I concur with, is that essentially our Brexit vote and the Trump victory were the rebellion the reaction of the somewheres against the anywheres and the arrogance of the anywheres. And those of you in the room, and I imagine there will be many of you, who are fanatical devotees, probably, of the annual Edelman Trust Barometer, which has been running, of course, now since the millennium, will know and will, I suspect, recognize many of the David Goodhart ideas. The 2017 Edelman Trust Barometer makes very important reading, because in there they identify across the world a decline in trust for the first time since they've been doing the barometer, a decline in trust simultaneously in all of the sectors of society that they look at: business, governments, civil society, and the media. And they identify a profound loss both of trust and of fear and of concern about the future. They identify that many of the people that they have surveyed are profoundly concerned about the pace and the extent of change, that they are deeply concerned with a sense of injustice, with a lack of hope, a lack of confidence, a desire for change. They have a fear of globalization and of an eroding of traditional social values. All of those things, I think, are all part of a picture that those of us in business or working closely with businesses need to understand and respond to. Incidentally, for those of you who are wanting a bluffer's guide to the road somewhere, there is a very good 2 minutes YouTube Views Night from the BBC Two Newsnight programme, where David Goodhart explains his core thesis. And it's well worth a quick 2 minutes. Now, the 2017 Edelman Trust Barometer identifies a series of key things that businesses need to do just in order to do no harm, to get a basic license to operate. And these are not rocket science. It's about not transferring profits around the world so as to aggressively avoid tax. It's about not getting top-level executive compensation so out of line with the average of the workers in the organisation. It's about not moving jobs aggressively to other parts of the world, not compromising on product or service quality by reducing the quality through reducing jobs. It's also in that Edelman Trust Barometer 2017 about not bribing and being alert to corruption. But those are the things they say that are just really to get the license to operate. We have to go much further if business really is to thrive in the 21st century. And that's especially true if you accept the argument, as I do, of the Canadian writer Don Tapscott in his book The Naked Corporation, that essentially now everything is ultimately for the record. Alistair Campbell, my only British predecessor in giving the oration, is on record as talking about ultimately everything is to be regarded as for the record. And if we are in an era of the naked corporation, then companies better well be buff. And by buff, that means being coherent and consistent in all that they do. John Brown, the former CEO of BP in its heyday, when it was for a brief time one of the world's very largest businesses. John Brown wrote a book 2 years ago now called Connect, in which he argued that if major businesses in particular want to re-establish connection with the societies in which they operate and do business and from which they draw a license to operate, then they will have to, first of all, understand their most material, social and environmental and economic impacts. Secondly, they will have to identify a broader societal purpose. Thirdly, they will need to apply world-class management skills to the application and the embedding of that purpose. And fourthly, they will need, in his words, to radically engage with a whole range of different stakeholders that they may never in the past have thought necessary. Now, perhaps at this point I should just pause and explain my personal background. You heard a very nice introduction and bio from Wayne a few moments ago, but so you understand where I am coming from. I am pro-markets. I believe in the power of profits. I think capitalism is the default mode of human behavior. I am in many respects now, in my country, an endangered species, which is a one-nation, pro-European Tory. But I also recognise that business as usual is not viable in the changed zeitgeist that we are now in. Now, I chose my title for this oration 16 months ago, and I thought actually I was being a little bit prescient and a bit ahead of the times. Now you can barely move in business circles and management conferences for talk about purpose. Indeed, there was a consultant, Andy Salt, who wrote a blog that Paul Polman from Unilever was quoting approvingly a few days ago. And in this blog, Andy Salt writes, "It's getting hard to avoid the P word. CEOs say they've got it. Millennials say they want it. Managers try and work out what it means for them. And celebrities, well, they just try and look as if they've got it. Thousands of articles and conferences and away days are being devoted to purpose and the questions it raises. What is our purpose? Do we need a purpose? Is purpose compatible with profit? Will people believe us or accuse us of purpose wash?" And in all this talk, writes this blogger consultant, Andy Salt, we risk overcomplicating what really should be a very simple question. Why does this business exist? And he might have added any number of new books about purpose. I personally, in the last 3 months alone, have done reviews for publishers of 4 different books on purpose, 2 of them by personal friends of mine. And there's lots of different consultants' reports coming out, almost it feels, week by week. Now it's interesting, because for several decades, there has been a very simple idea about what is the purpose of business. And that is, in the Milton and Friedman Chicago School of Economics idea, the purpose of business is maximizing shareholder value. Well, let me quote what one of the most distinguished Financial Times op-ed writers, Martin Wolf, had to say recently about this. He wrote in the Financial Times, "Almost nothing in economics is more important than thinking through how companies should be managed and for what ends. Unfortunately, we have made a mess of this. This mess has a name. It is shareholder value maximization. Operating companies in line with this belief not only leads to misbehavior, but may also militate against their true social aim, which is to generate greater prosperity." And so I think it's interesting, as in the words of Rebecca Henderson, a distinguished professor at Harvard, we are now in an era where businesses are being encouraged to think about a pro-societal purpose. I think there are 4 immediate things that any business can be doing about purpose. The first is actually, it starts with top leadership, it starts with the board. So does the board have a mindset? Does the board have a mindset? I am, as Wayne said now, a business school professor. I still have to pinch myself some days to realize that I am, but I am a business school professor, so we have to have a 2x2 matrix. So visualize a 2x2 matrix with one axis about the role of the board and the other axis about your view of managing risks and opportunities, social, environmental, and economic. And where you want to be, I would argue, is in the top right-hand quadrant, where you have a mindset which is that you'd say the role of the board is not just to monitor, but it is also to mentor. And on the axis of managing your social, environmental, and economic impacts, this is not just about risk mitigation, but it is also about opportunity maximization. Peter Drucker, shortly before he died, expressed it very clearly. Every great social problem and business opportunity, every great social problem and global issue is a business opportunity in disguise. So the first thing I think that companies need to do is to look and see, is our board really with the program? Does our board really have a mindset around purpose and sustainability? We have a white paper which we published from my centre with the organisation Business in the Community here in the UK on that very topic, if anyone wants to drill down some more. The second thing linked to boards is about companies establishing a kind of stakeholder advisory group or experts advisory group to help the board and the senior management team really to understand what are both the risks and the opportunities of the social and environmental and economic impacts that the organisation has. I'm struck by the number of the leading global companies today who have established such advisory groups. Thirdly, I think organisations need to set evidence or science-based targets. Again, we have just published an occasional paper on that topic from my centre at Cranfield. And the fourth immediate thing, I think, is for a big business in particular, but for organisations more broadly, to think about how do we frame and understand our corporate purpose and strategy in the context of the way in which we are doing business and the way in which the Sustainable Development Goals are emerging. I've been personally very struck, pleasantly so, by the speed with which the SDGs have been taken up. But if business really wishes to continue into the indefinite future, then it needs to do what Charles Handy, the great social philosopher and management guru, said in 1990 in a seminal lecture for the Royal Society of Arts in London. Each business needs to define for itself its own purpose. And there are some tools available to help a business to do so. Here in the UK, we have a fascinating and superb organisation called Blueprint for Better Business, which provides a framework and a group of principles to help businesses to develop and understand their own purpose and to implement that through the organisation. Again, I've been struck by the take-up globally as a kind of vanguard movement of the concept of the B Corp or the benefit corporation. And I know relatively recently in Australia, you have B Lab Australia and New Zealand coming into existence and advocating, amongst other things, reforms to the Companies Act Australia 2001 to give explicit recognition to the idea of a benefit corporation in law in your corporate jurisdiction. We have similar debates going on here in the UK. We were expecting in our Queen's speech yesterday some announcements about corporate governance reform, but that, along with many other issues, will wait for another day. But that is another matter beyond my pay grade for this evening. I think the exciting thing now, when it comes to business purpose, is that we have some hard evidence that implementing a pro-societal purpose actually pays as well. So Unilever, for example, has been very explicit in reliving its founding purpose. Paul Polman, since taking over as CEO in 2009, has played a profoundly important role in debates about the role of business in modern society, particularly in the context of sustainable development. And they've actually reported just a few weeks ago that of their 40 top global brands, those are brands which have annual average sales of $1 billion or more. US, then of those 40 brands, 18 of them have already adopted a societal purpose for the individual brand as well as for the overall Unity. And those 18 brands are significantly outperforming the rest of Unity. They actually grew 50% faster in 2016 than the rest of Unity. They represented 60% of Unilever's growth last year. And this is corroborating what we know from earlier seminal books like the 1994 classic Built to Last by Collins and Porras, or the 2003 Firms of Endearment book by Raj Sisodia, or more recently Freya Williams with her Green Giants. All of these are telling us that actually adopting a broader societal purpose and living that purpose can actually pay. And I think that's particularly because it links back to individual purpose. It links back to the attraction and development and retention of talent. Daniel Pink told us in that remarkable book, Drive, what motivates people, what gets people out of bed in the morning. 3 things, he said. It's about autonomy, the desire to steer your own ship. It's about mastery, the ability to be able to steer that ship well. And it's about purpose, knowing that your journey has some wider, broader meaning. Deloitte Millennial surveys and lots of other surveys of millennials in particular tell us that millennials are looking for organizations that can combine profit with purpose. They believe that you can do well and do good simultaneously. Yes, of course I know. For some, there will always be the mating call of the Porsche. But I think that is much less where most people are today than it was in the past, if it was in the past either. So I think there is a profoundly important argument for businesses to think about their purpose in the context of attracting and developing and retaining the talent of millennials. Remember, the Harvard Policy Institute tells us that by 2020, half of the global working population will be millennials, 75% by 2025. Now, you can probably see, even through the distortions of this Skype link, that I'm not a millennial. But I too want my work to have meaning and to have purpose. And I'm also part of a growing phenomenon about people looking for later careers with purpose. We just published a white paper with one of our visiting fellows, Anita Hoffman, in my centre. Anita is a very experienced executive search and coach and mentor for board members and C-suite executives. And Anita was noticing for several years that she was interviewing 1,000, 1,500 senior executives every year. And she was finding many of them were talking about switching careers, sometimes quite fundamental, because they were looking for legacy later in their lives and in their career. And in her paper, Later Careers with Purpose for the Centre, which she's turning into a book coming out in the autumn, she talks about how individuals and organizations can attract and retain the later life talent as well. And given the idea that we now have to expect longer, fuller working lives, there's 2 business school professors in the London Business School, Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott, who've just written a book called The 100-Year Life, which basically says, forget, study, work, retire. That's very anachronistic. We're now in an era where we will be constantly refreshing, recharging, perhaps upskilling, getting some new skills, maybe going off to travel around the world, as Australians have done for many, many years on their grand tours and so on. But actually, the old models will change. And in the context of having to prepare yourself to manage your career for a much longer period, the opportunities for finding careers with purpose are going to become much greater. And so the challenge, I think, is to align individual and organisational purpose. Now, as I said, I am bitterly disappointed I can't be with you this evening, not least because it's always so much fun to come and go around the tables after the presentation and to engage in debate, to have challenge, to have, say, the but argument, the critic who's over there in the right-hand corner of the room who's absolutely frustrated by what this Brit has been saying for the last few minutes and who really wants to take me on. And it's deeply frustrating I can't engage in that face-to-face. So let me make this offer. First of all, if you have any questions or challenges, you can tweet me if you're on Twitter at @DavidGrayson_ and send me any questions. Or you can give your questions or your comments to Wayne and Jean and Jeff and other members of the centre team, and they will hopefully collate them and send them through, and we can share them. And depending on when my surgeons say that I am fit enough to travel, I'm hoping I might be able to come to Australia in early October for an International Carers Conference in my role as Wayne explained, Chairman of Carers UK. And if so, I will be delighted to, if any of the companies here this evening would like to host a little conversational get-together, I'd be delighted to do so. But for tonight, let me just leave you with a few questions. First of all, to those of you from companies, has my organisation already got a societal purpose? And if it is it just a catchy phrase, or is it authentic, embedded, lived? If not, do we need to get a broader, deeper societal purpose? Do we have the resilience really to stick with it and with the hard graft to really make it embedded? If we think we have one, do our employees recognise it? There's a new book coming out in 2 weeks' time by a gentleman called Neil Gort, which actually talks about how few organisations, even that have purpose, their employees don't know what it really is outside of the senior management team. And if we are honest with ourselves that there is a gap between what we think as senior executives our purpose is as an organisation and our employees' understanding of that, how are we going to fill that gap? And for all of us in the room tonight, either physically or virtually, as in my case, then what are my purposes? Have they changed over time? Helen Johnson was only able to fulfill all of her purposes because of a remarkable employer, Westbank, who have superb carer policies as part of their employee family-friendly policies and as part of their responsible business approach overall. But she's been able to grow her purposes over time. How might I grow my purposes over time? Do I find my key purpose in my work? And if not, why not? And what am I going to do in order to change that? Can I job craft? Can I become a social entrepreneur to push ideas forward through my organisation that I believe will help my organisation to develop societal purpose and at the same time also fulfil my own sense of purpose? Why put off what you could do now until it might be too late? It's not the amount of years in your life that counts, it's the amount of life in your years. And for any entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs in the room tonight, am I going to lead a purposeful business? Excuse me. And how can organisations like B-Lab, Australia and New Zealand help me on my journey? So let me conclude with another of my heroes, apart from Helen, Charles Handy, I quoted earlier. When he closed his 1990 lecture for the RSA, What is a Company For? He closed with these words: in a time of change, we must always question whether the things that used to work will work so well in the future. We must not be slaves to our history, but trustees of our destinies. Our businesses are too precious to be lost because we have not dared to question the past or to dream the future. Let us start now, before it is too late. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.